The Lions just have to look themselves in the mirror and say, why'd we lose this game? We gave it to them.
To be up 14-0, to be up 24-7, and to lose in that way, disaster.
21 carries for 148 yards and 3 scores in the first half. What possible excuse can you have for running the football 8 times in the second half? You got a 24-7 lead at halftime. You do not have an excuse to lose that game.
If you told me in the preseason that the Lions were going to make it to the NFC Championship game, I'd have told you this season must have been a success. But what about now? Does it feel like a success? Let's discuss. Before we get to the content, please be sure to like and subscribe for more content. And now that that's out of the way, look, the big question that you got to ask yourself, was this season a success for the Detroit Lions? 2 years ago, the Lions only won 3 games. Last year, they went 9-8 and actually had a playoff scenario, but lost due to a tiebreaker with the Seahawks. Thanks for that, by the way. This year, the Lions opened up the season with a day 1 victory over the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. As the season played out, the Lions were briefly the top seed in the NFC. Coming into the season, I would have said the Lions making the playoffs and making it to the second round would be a success because that's improvement from last year. This is an organization that hasn't gone deep in a long time. It would be tremendous progress to go from 3 wins 2 years ago to the second round of the playoffs this year. But as the season played out, the expectations rose. As the Lions are looking like the number 1 seed in the NFC, the expectations are pretty high. And then naturally, those expectations climb each round of the playoffs that the Lions get deeper and deeper in. They beat the Rams, albeit by a point, but a win is a win. The expectation's a little bit higher. It's like, no, you should probably make it to the championship. They go up against the Buccaneers. Sure enough, the Lions do win that game. Okay, now they're in the NFC Championship against the number 1 seed San Francisco 49ers. At that point, I'd say they exceeded expectations, except for the fact that by halftime, they had a 24-7 lead. I'd say that was the peak of expectations. When you're up 24-7 at half, it's now expected that you're going to go to the Super Bowl. And then we all know what happened next. 49ers made some great halftime adjustments. The Lions made some peculiar halftime adjustments. For instance, I don't know why when you were running the ball down the 49ers' throat in the first half, 150 yards rushing right around, and then in the second half, you only rushed the ball 8 times. I don't understand that adjustment. I agree with what Dan Campbell said in his post-game press conference.
It's going to be twice as hard to get back to this point next year than it was this year. You know, you're not hiding from anybody anymore. Everybody's going to want a piece of you.
So I actually got to look at it like this is a huge disappointment. And was this season improvement? Yeah, that's just a mathematical question. You made it further than last year. You got more wins than last year. Your stats in pretty much every regard were better than last year. But that NFC Championship, it ranks up there with the 2014 season Green Bay Packers. Got all the way to the NFC Championship, had a big lead over Seattle. Seattle came back and wound up winning that game. Or the Green Bay Packers in the 2020 NFC Championship when they decided to kick a field goal knowing Tom Brady was on the other sideline, and they wound up losing that game. I'd put the Detroit Lions this year, their NFC Championship performance, I'd put it right up there with them. It feels like a great collapse of risen expectations. Now, how much of the blame falls on Dan Campbell? I've actually been reluctant to make this video because of the fact that I love Dan Campbell. I love what he brings to Detroit. I love his attitude. His opening press conference when he first got to the Detroit Lions.
And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off. It's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down. On the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap.
That's just like one of the coolest first press conferences I have ever heard, if not the coolest first press conference I've ever heard. And when I think of a coach who sets the tone for a team and has the respect of every single one of his players, it's hard to say anybody has done that better than Dan Campbell. I would have said Mike Tomlin, except for the fact that I've never seen Mike Tomlin do up-downs with his team before. But we have to talk about Dan Campbell's aggressive play calling, his aggressive decision-making. Because on the one hand, it has changed the tone in Detroit. On the other hand, it's cost them 2 big-time wins. Most of us remember the Week 17 matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. That was a game where coming into the game with a win, the Lions would have been tied with the 49ers as the top seed in the NFC. With a loss, they dropped down to 3 behind the Dallas Cowboys or Philadelphia Eagles, depending on what happened in the NFC East. Turned out Cowboys. It dropped the Lions down to the 3 seed. With under 30 seconds left in the fourth quarter, the Lions score a touchdown to make the score Detroit 19, Dallas 20. A lot of coaches in the NFL would have kicked a point after. Tie the game up. Let's try and hold them for the remaining 23 seconds, and we'll go to overtime and we'll win this thing there. Our chances are better if we go that route. Dan Campbell is not most coaches, and I was actually fine with this decision to go for 2. Now, a lot of us remember what happened next. The Detroit Lions ran a play that involved Taylor Decker, an offensive lineman, becoming an eligible receiver, catching the pass, scored the 2-point conversion. Okay, Lions are now up 21-20, except for according to referee Brad Allen, Decker never reported as eligible. Now, we have a whole other video on that. I'll put it up here somewhere. I'll also put it in the description so it's easy for you to find if you want to watch that. So whether you agree with the Brad Allen referee call or not, just to be clear, I don't agree with it, the Lions now have a decision to make. They can go for 2 again, but from the 7-yard line, or they can kick a 38-yard point after attempt. So the Lions decide to go for 2. Micah Parsons jumps off sides, free play, Jared Goff throws an interception. Okay, cool, but it was a free play, doesn't matter. So now you get the ball half the distance to the goal if you want to try for a 2-point conversion, which put it at the 3.5, or you're back to a 33-yard point after, which is the standard when you factor in the full distance of the end zone, plus how far back the holder holds the ball. It's a 33-yard point after. That's what it usually is. Dan Campbell, once again, elected to go for 2, and the Lions didn't get it. I appreciate Dan Campbell's aggression and the attitude that he brings to the team, but at some point, strategy needs to outweigh pride. Going for 2 from the 7 instead of a 38-yard point after is pride. Going for it again from the 3.5 instead of a standard-sized point after is pride. Fun fact, a group of Lions is also called a pride. And then, of course, there's the NFC Championship game that we all just watched. In the third quarter, Dan Campbell had an opportunity to kick a field goal, go up by a few more points, and instead they went for it on a 4th and 2. Josh Reynolds did drop the pass, so that is on Reynolds, but drop passes happen. So you had a chance to put more points on the board, and you chose not to do it, which would have brought the lead back up to 17. Would have made it a 3-possession game again. Make it that much harder on the 49ers to come back. And then halfway through the 4th quarter, there was another 4th down attempt that would have tied the game up. You could have gotten right back to tie with the 49ers at least. And instead, the Lions elected to go for it, and once again, they didn't get it. In a game where you wound up losing by 3 points, those 2 decisions loom pretty large. You always have to factor in the butterfly effect. Okay, if you take the 3 points here, then actually the 49ers changed their strategy moving forward, so you never actually know how it plays out. If you would have taken 3 points in the 3rd quarter and then another 3 points halfway through the 4th, those 2 things would have changed everything else, just logically speaking, because the 49ers would have had to put the foot on the gas a little bit more, or they would have had to do things a little bit differently. But after this game, I'm not sure how much I believe in Dan Campbell's coaching philosophy. I think unless he hires an assistant coach that can talk strategy for him and tell him, almost overrule him when he wants to go for it, he's going to continue to lose these big games. Now, when I think about Dan Campbell's philosophy and his approach, I do think of another head coach that was famous for deciding to go for it a lot. None other than Riverboat Ron Rivera with the Carolina Panthers. He was on the brink of being fired, started going for it on 4th down, started taking more chances, and all of a sudden, not only is his job safe, but the Panthers season turned around. He lovingly got the nickname Riverboat Ron because his decision-making went back and forth from strategy to aggression, and like a riverboat, it just went back and forth. Now, the distinction between Riverboat Ron and Dan Campbell is that Dan Campbell's not a riverboat. He's a tank. He will come at you 4 straight downs, have it blow up in his face, and then come right back at you another 4 downs the next time that they get the ball. It doesn't sway back and forth with Dan Campbell. It's all this way all the time. And unfortunately, for that reason, the Detroit Lions season is over. Please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button for more content surrounding happenings of the NFL, the MLB, the NHL, the NBA, the NCAA, the ABCD, the NWA, sports world. Please subscribe.